Well, look, Tom, I don't know if Josh is watching Sky, your program on Sky every week, because I remember a couple of weeks ago I was saying that there has to be some really good ideas for an economic recovery plan to support business, including wage incentives to bring on new employees. But also I mentioned things like tax relief, particularly for small business, to get through this period, whether it be on GST or working with the states on payroll tax, but also things like ideas like a 50% tax offset, for example, for startups to get them going, to provide real incentives for businesses to bring on employees or start new businesses. And things like, we know that the housing market is absolutely in a lot of strife because migration has come to a halt effectively. And so things like supporting the industry through funding for public housing, social housing is really important. And I hope some of these ideas come through in the budget. Maybe Josh is watching us this morning as well. So I do have question marks about why they would freeze the pension at this particular time when pensioners aren't hiding the money in their socks under the bed. They're spending it. Why would they not extend JobKeeper and JobSeeker, or not cut JobKeeper and JobSeeker, because that money flows into the economy? It's not an either-or proposition. We need to ensure that we're stimulating the economy as much as possible in this recovery phase, or the beginning of this recovery phase.
I guess the key question, Trent Zimmerman, is will there really be businesses right now willing to hire when you have other support leaving the economy? You know, how realistic is that?
Well, firstly, quite a revelation that Peter Khalil's written the Treasurer's budget night speech, so congratulations, Peter, on that contribution. But look, obviously it's 2 weeks to budget day, and we're in the usual fervour of budget speculation, which is probably a little bit unfair to me to try to add to, because, like you, will find out on budget night. But look, I think what is clear is that the Prime Minister has said that this budget is going to be about increasing aggregate demand, and it's also very clear that we're going to be adopting a number of strategies to achieve that, some of which we're already doing. So the focus on skills, training and infrastructure, for example. But obviously there'll be a full suite of measures on budget night that look at increasing demand, and that is all about the one goal of trying to get more people back into work as quickly as possible.
So when you spoke before as well, Peter Khalil, about construction period, Labor has spoken about social housing. You just mentioned that this would have to only be a partial measure, though, wouldn't it? We're talking about possibly more than 300,000 homes over 3 years not being built. There's got to be more than just picking up in the slack out of some social housing building. What else should happen?
Well, I think clearly, Tom, there is a huge issue with the housing market because, as I mentioned, migration has come to a grinding halt. And by the way, it puts paid to this lie that the parts of the right, I'm not suggesting Trent does, parts of the right say that, migrants cut migration because they're taking our jobs and this and that. Migrants actually contribute to the economy in an enormous way. They create jobs, they spend money in the economy, they buy new houses, they drive that construction and that economic engine, if you like. And that's been something that's happening in Australia for happened for decades. So on your question about what can be done, and Trent, I do hope that Josh is stealing our ideas by watching these programs. I wouldn't put it past him. But I think, we certainly have to be investing in infrastructure right across the board, get local government who have, shovel-ready projects to go. I mean, this is the same government that was reluctant to actually bring forward their infrastructure spending pre-pandemic with all these sorts of excuses. Now they're going to bring it forward. It's almost like they're coming to these ideas always very slowly. But I will say, just on the ideas around the construction industry, yes, we need public housing infrastructure. That will create jobs in the construction industry. It also will address an issue with respect to people who need public housing. I grew up in public housing. We need that level playing field where there's safe and secure housing for people, particularly who've lost their jobs, who've come out of a really terrible economic period, so that they can rebuild their lives. Social housing and public housing is important. Doubling the first home owners grant, different ideas to actually stimulate the construction sector, and then more infrastructure spending brought forward with local government on projects, not just sitting on your hands and on your haunches waiting for it to happen.
Well, what about the plan of the government? I mean, there's obviously the home builder scheme. That might make up about 10% of the overall loss. If you're lucky, Trent Zimmerman, there's got to be something else, doesn't there? How do you redeploy this workforce?
Well, that's why I think that we will be looking at the full suite of measures that we can to stimulate the economy and particular sections of the economy like the construction industry. You mentioned obviously one program that we've already implemented. I disagree vehemently with Peter's suggestion that we've been slow on infrastructure. In fact, additional money has already been flowing to local councils as a case in point to support infrastructure spending. And I remember vividly early in this pandemic, the Deputy Prime Minister writing to all local councils, including my own, asking for them to nominate projects that were shovel-ready. We are bringing forward infrastructure spending, and I think we're going to see, my guess is more of that in the budget, which will obviously be a big boon for the construction industry.
All right, well, we won't play the guessing game. We'll see what's in there and perhaps debate it after then. And just finally, bringing Australians back from overseas. Trent, why has the government not gone down the path of perhaps some of the regional facilities, perhaps some of the ones that previously been used for detention and so on? It'd be a pretty safe way to do this, wouldn't it, in terms of people not being in the community and the risk of an outbreak that we saw in Melbourne?
Well, a couple of points. Firstly, I do welcome the fact that National Cabinet has agreed to increase the caps over the next couple of weeks, but the scale of the task that's facing governments and the number of Australians that are caught overseas exceeds, I think, even the caps that are now being put in place. And I really think the premiers should be working harder at increasing those caps, remembering that before the Victorian outbreak, which caused some understandable nervousness about hotel quarantines, we were seeing states bringing back their citizens without the type of restrictions currently in place. So I would hope that, in fact, the states can go further, because there are somewhere north of 20,000 Australians that do desperately want to come home. And that desperation is rising, as I'm seeing in cases that are contacting me in my own electorate. But in relation to regional facilities, firstly, the Commonwealth obviously does not control much of Australia's landmass. It's either state or territory. It's really facilities like Christmas Island that we directly control. But to give you two cases in point, people have mentioned the facility that was used for the couple of 100 people that we brought back from Wuhan. That is now being used by the Northern Territory government for domestic quarantine. Christmas Island is being used to house people often with criminal records that are awaiting transferal out of Australia. But in either case, we're talking about even if they were available, a solution for a couple of 100, not the tens of thousands that we do need to bring home.
Peter, what about the question now? A few people sticking up their hand and saying, what about Melbourne restarting its hotel quarantine program, perhaps in a couple of weeks? I mean, we've got 11 people today, the total number of cases. Do this very carefully and do it well, but should that be on the table soon?
Well, yeah, the news is good. The news is good, Tom, that the numbers are going down, certainly, and I think all states need to be doing everything they can to increase their capacity to take in Australians coming back from overseas. But I'm sorry, I've got to call out Trent on this state kind of answer. The Commonwealth government, his government, last I checked, the Constitution is responsible for international borders and people coming in and going out, right? So it's your responsibility. It's no good to just outsource this to the states entirely. And it's not beyond the federal government's wit to set up a program where they can actually have facilities in place to take and quarantine people. It's called, doing a contract with some of the hotels of the airports, at the international airports in all the major cities. It's about setting up those facilities. If they can set up Christmas Island, the click of a finger for 2 refugees for political reasons, they can set up some hotels and quarantine arrangements. Right. They've got the ADF, they've got personnel to do it. They've offered that support to the states, in fact. So I think it's a pretty poor excuse